My 75th birthday changed everything when I realized my own children were trying to declare me mentally unfit. I never thought I'd be the person writing something like this. I've always been private, someone who handles things quietly, who believes family matters should stay within the family. But I've spent the last 3 months going over what happened, reading the unsigned documents again and again, and I've realized that silence is exactly what they were counting on. So here I am, finally telling someone, finally telling you all. My name is Robert, Bob to those who have known me long enough to earn it. I'm 75 years old, and I have a mind that still works perfectly fine, regardless of what my children tried to convince a judge would be true in the next 90 days. The evening started like any other birthday dinner should start. Warm, hopeful, full of the kind of anticipation you feel when people you love are gathering to acknowledge another year of your existence. I should have known something was wrong from the moment I walked into Marcello's Italian restaurant. The reservation was for 8 o'clock, and I arrived 5 minutes early, as I always do. Punctuality is a matter of respect, something my own father drilled into me 60-some years ago, and it's a habit I've never shaken. The maitre d' led me to a private room in the back. Of course there was a private room. I hadn't paid for that. That was their doing. My wife Margaret and I had raised 4 children together, and while we'd never been wealthy, we'd been comfortable. We'd worked steady jobs, managed our money carefully, and paid for things ourselves. It felt strange to be guided toward a room that cost extra money, to see flowers I hadn't ordered, to hear the muted sounds of celebration that hadn't originated from my own planning. "It's our treat tonight, Dad," my oldest son Michael had said when I'd protested about the venue. "Just let us handle it." That should have been my first warning. Michael, who'd always been practical, even as a child. Michael, who'd worked in corporate law for the last 20 years and had mastered the art of saying one thing while doing another. The private room was intimate, elegant in the way that restaurants try to be elegant when they've calculated exactly how much your bill will be and set the atmosphere accordingly. Floor-to-ceiling drapes in deep burgundy, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my first car, a long mahogany table with white linen, place settings already perfect, as if waiting for important business to be conducted rather than a simple family birthday. Margaret arrived next, my wife of 47 years. She looked beautiful that night, she always does, but there was something different about how she looked at me. I'd caught that look before, usually when she was worried about something. Her lips curved upward in a smile, but her eyes held a question. Or maybe they held something worse, guilt. "Hello, my darling," I'd said, kissing her cheek. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Bobby," she'd replied, and something in the way she said my old nickname, the one she'd called me before we were married, before the world had narrowed us into the roles we'd inhabited for nearly 5 decades, made my chest tighten just slightly. A premonition, maybe, the first whisper of something being fundamentally wrong. The children arrived in succession. Michael and his wife Catherine, then Jennifer, my second child, with her quiet husband David, who rarely spoke at family gatherings but had a way of disappearing completely despite being physically present. And finally, the twins, Patrick and Sarah, who at 42 still had the habit of arriving together even though they lived in different states, as if they'd coordinated their movements since birth. All 4 of them, all together, a rarity in recent years, given that Michael lived in Boston, Jennifer in Philadelphia, and Patrick had a consulting job that took him to Chicago most weeks. Sarah was the only one who'd stayed local, still living in the same city where she'd grown up, running a small marketing firm out of a downtown office. "Happy birthday, Dad," they chorused, and there was genuine warmth in their voices. I'm certain of that, which is what makes the rest of it all the more difficult to comprehend. We settled around the table, menus were presented by an attentive server, wine was ordered and poured. The early part of the evening followed the script that family dinners follow. Stories were shared. Catherine mentioned a vacation they were planning to Tuscany. David said something vague about work that nobody fully understood. Patrick made a joke about traffic on the way there. Sarah asked Margaret about a knitting project she'd been working on. It felt normal, it felt safe. It was around the second course, when everyone was distracted by the arrival of pasta and the necessary work of eating, that I first noticed something unusual. Michael caught my eye and nodded toward Catherine, who was sitting beside him. She produced a leather portfolio from beneath the table, and my first thought was that they were showing photos, maybe from that vacation, maybe something one of their kids had accomplished. "Dad," Michael said, drawing the attention of the table toward us. "We wanted to give you something tonight. All four of us have been thinking about this for a while now, and we felt like your birthday was the right time." He pulled out several papers from the portfolio. They were forms, official-looking documents with official-looking seals and symbols, the kind of thing that makes you feel the weight of bureaucracy even before you understand what they mean. "What's this?" I asked, setting down my fork. "Just some insurance stuff," Jennifer said quickly, too quickly. "You know, to protect the family, really important but not complicated." The way she said it was practiced, I could tell they'd rehearsed this. All of them together, they'd written out exactly what they were going to say. That realization hit me harder than it should have. "Insurance," I said. "I'm already insured for everything. Life insurance through my pension, medical through Medicare. I have my will in place and my healthcare proxy designated. What insurance could I possibly need?" "It's more about updating things," Patrick said smoothly. "Making sure everything's in order. You know how these things are, they need to be refreshed, especially when people reach a certain age." Reach a certain age, as if 75 was ancient, as if I'd already entered the final chapter of my life and we were all just waiting to turn the page. "Let me see them," I said. Michael hesitated. That hesitation is something I've replayed in my mind countless times since that night. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was an eternity. In those 2 seconds, I watched his eyes dart toward the others. I watched the smallest nod from Sarah. I watched Margaret turn her head away. He slid the papers across the table toward me. The first page was innocuous enough. Standard legal language about healthcare directives. I'd seen similar documents before, but as I flipped through, my eyes caught on things, specific things, phrases that weren't standard, terminology that seemed designed to obscure meaning. "Cognitive decline," I read aloud. "What does that mean?" "Just a general statement," Michael said. "For legal purposes, standard language." I kept reading. My eyes moved faster now, the casual attention of a birthday dinner guest transforming into something more focused, more concerned. And then I saw it, the word that would change everything. "Incompetency," I said, my voice very quiet. "The papers say I'm being declared incompetent." Nobody spoke. I looked up from the documents to face 4 pairs of eyes that suddenly couldn't meet mine. My wife stared at her plate. My oldest son cleared his throat. "Not incompetent," Jennifer said carefully. "That's not the right word. It's more about establishing conservatorship, a legal arrangement where—" "I know what conservatorship means," I interrupted. "I know exactly what it means. It means you're trying to take control of my assets, my decisions, my life." "Dad, it's not like that," Sarah began. "Then what is it like?" I asked, and I could hear the edge in my own voice now. The shock was wearing off, being replaced by something else, something that felt like betrayal tastes if betrayal had a flavor. Patrick reached across the table toward the papers. "Let's talk about this rationally." "I am being rational," I said, pulling the documents back. "I'm reading the words that my own children have brought to my birthday dinner to have me sign, words that say I'm no longer fit to make decisions about my own life, words that say you should control everything I've worked for. So no, Patrick, I don't think we need to talk about it rationally. I think we need to talk about why you're doing this." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that fills a room like water. Complete, suffocating. All around us, the restaurant continued on, other patrons with their forks and their wine glasses and their normal lives. But at our table, in our private room with its expensive flowers and its crystal chandelier, everything had stopped. "We are doing this because we care about you," Michael said finally, "because we're worried about you." "Worried about what?" I demanded. "Worried that I'll make bad decisions, Worried that I'll spend my money poorly, worried that I'll embarrass you somehow. Worried that you're not okay, Jennifer said, and there was something in her voice that almost sounded genuine, almost made me want to believe that they had some legitimate concern. But I'd read the papers, I'd seen the language, I knew what they were trying to do. I'm fine, I said. I'm 75 years old and I'm fine. I still go to the gym 3 times a week. I read, I work in my garden, I help Margaret with the house. I pay my bills on time. I remember where I put my keys. I know what day of the week it is. I know who I am. We know, Michael said, but then why are you trying to declare me incompetent? The word hung in the air. That was the first time I'd said it out loud. Not establish conservatorship, not update your legal arrangements, not any of the euphemisms they'd tried to use. The truth, plain and simple, they were trying to declare their father incompetent. We think you need help managing your affairs, Michael continued. We think at your age, it would be wise to. At my age, I repeated. You mean old age. You mean the age where I'm apparently supposed to hand over everything I've earned to my children and hope they'll let me keep enough money for my own care. That's not fair, Catherine said sharply. We're trying to help you. I looked at her for a moment. Catherine, who I'd always liked. Catherine, who'd brought me good whiskey for my birthday 3 years ago and who I'd thanked properly. Catherine, who was now sitting at my birthday dinner, helping my son try to steal my autonomy. Is it, I asked quietly, is it not fair? Let me read something to you. I'd been scanning the documents while we talked, my eyes moving faster now, picking up pieces of the larger picture they were trying to construct. I found it on page 3, a typo, a single typographical error that revealed everything. Here, I said, reading aloud, this states that I've been diagnosed with demential decline, not mental, not cognitive, demential. Do you see? This is badly written. These documents are poorly prepared. They're full of errors because nobody was expecting me to actually read them. Nobody was expecting me to sit here at my birthday dinner and actually pay attention to what you were trying to do. That's just a typo, Sarah said weakly. A simple mistake. A simple mistake, I echoed. You're trying to take away my legal rights based on documents with typos. Documents that were apparently drawn up quickly, without proper care, with the expectation that your old father would just sign whatever his children asked him to sign. I stood up. I don't know if I made a conscious decision to do it or if my body simply rejected the situation so completely that it needed to remove itself from the table. I stood and I looked at each of them. I'm not signing these, I said. I'm not signing anything, and I think I should go home now. Dad, please, Margaret said, and she was crying. Please sit down, please let us explain. I looked at my wife, the woman I'd spent nearly half a century with, the woman who was supposed to be on my side, and I couldn't recognize her in that moment. Oh, I knew her features, I knew the way the light caught the silver in her hair, but the person looking back at me was a stranger, a collaborator, someone who had sat across from me while I slept, while I was vulnerable, while I was hers in every way a person can be theirs, and she'd been part of this plan. Explain what? I asked. Explain how you convinced yourselves that doing this was loving. Explain how you decided that betraying your father was justified by concern for his welfare. Explain what happens to my house, my accounts, the savings I've been building for the last 40 years. Do you divide them now, while I'm still alive to watch? Or do you do it after I sign, when it's legally yours and there's nothing I can do about it? It's not like that, Michael said, standing up too. You're not thinking clearly about this. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, I said, crystal clear, and I'm leaving. I started toward the door. Dad, it was Sarah, my youngest, who said my name, and the way she said it, like she was mourning something that hadn't yet died, made me pause. Please, just hear us out. I turned back, and for a moment, I did consider it. I did consider sitting back down at that table and listening to whatever explanation they'd prepared. I did consider that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe, somewhere in the depths of things I didn't understand, they really did think this was for my own good. But then Michael spoke again. Your memory isn't what it used to be, Dad. You've been forgetting things, mixing up dates, not paying attention to details. And I understood in that moment what had happened. They hadn't done this because they were worried about me. They'd done this because they'd built a narrative about me. They'd noticed things, small things, human things, the kind of lapses that happen to everyone but that become ammunition when you're 75, and they'd woven them into a story. A story where their father wasn't aging naturally, he was declining, where his small forgetfulness wasn't just the human condition, it was dementia. Where his need for family support wasn't just life, it was evidence of incompetency. And they'd shared that story with each other. They'd reinforced it with each conversation. They'd built it up until it seemed real to them, until they'd convinced themselves that declaring their father legally incompetent wasn't betrayal, it was care. My memory, I said slowly, is fine, and even if it wasn't, that's not a reason to do this. That's not legal grounds to strip a person of their rights. You know that, Michael? You're a lawyer, you know that. There are other considerations, Michael said quietly. What considerations? I asked. He didn't answer. The house, I said. The understanding came to me all at once, falling into place like the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was working on. You want the house, or something about it. Is it the mortgage? Is there a mortgage I don't know about? Or are you just trying to get it appraised? Transfer the deed. Dad, this isn't about the house, Patrick said, and he was lying. I could hear it in his voice, see it in the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. Yes, it is, I said. The house is worth something, it's paid off. It's in a good neighborhood, and it belongs to me and Margaret, and if you have conservatorship over me, you can convince a court that selling it is in my best interest. You can convince a judge that I don't need a house, that I should be in assisted living, that my assets should be liquidated for my care, even if I don't need that care, even if I want to stay in my own home. I looked at Jennifer, at David, at Patrick and Sarah and Michael and Catherine, at Margaret, whose eyes were red from crying. Is that it? I asked. Is that the plan? Declare me incompetent, get control of my assets and sell the house. How are you going to split the money, equal shares, or does the one who actually filed the paperwork get a bigger cut? Robert, stop, Margaret said. You're being cruel. Cruel? She called me cruel for pointing out what they were doing. I'm leaving, I said again, and this time I didn't stop walking. I made it all the way out of the restaurant. The maitre d' tried to hand me a coat I hadn't checked, and I waved him away without looking. The night air was cool, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing it in, trying to ground myself in something real. My mind was racing, the documents, the typo, the careful language they'd used, the rehearsed explanations, the way they'd timed it on my birthday in a restaurant with a private room, with none of them having a way to easily leave or escape. They'd trapped me there. They'd presented me with papers designed to take away my freedom, and they'd done it between the salad and the main course. I pulled out my phone. I hadn't driven, Margaret and I had planned to share a car with Michael and Catherine, so I called a cab. While I waited, I reread the documents I was still holding. The more I read them, the worse it got, because they were comprehensive. Whoever had drawn them up, and I suspected Michael had done it himself or had supervised someone doing it, had been thorough. They covered everything, my medical decisions, my financial decisions, my living arrangements, my property, everything. There was a conservatorship petition included in the paperwork, a formal request to a court to declare me mentally incompetent based on, and I read this part carefully several times, recent behavioral changes, demonstrated memory loss, poor judgment regarding financial matters, and general inability to care for himself. None of that was true, but it was written in the language of law, with the authority of legal documents, and I knew that the courts saw hundreds of these petitions. Judges approved them regularly, and all my children had to do was show up to a hearing, maybe produce a doctor who'd never actually examined me, but who they'd paid to provide an opinion, and suddenly my entire life would be in their hands. The cab arrived. I gave the driver my address and settled back in the seat, still holding those papers like they were poisoned, like they could transform from dangerous words into harmful action if I wasn't careful. I spent the entire drive home trying to understand how it had come to this. How my children, people I'd raised, people I'd taught to be honest and kind and good, had decided that deceiving their father was acceptable, that betraying him was justified. And the worst part was that I could trace it. I could see exactly how they'd arrived at this conclusion. 6 months ago, I'd forgotten the name of a restaurant I'd wanted to take Margaret to. I'd known what I wanted to order there, remembered the chef's special, recalled the daycare in detail, but the name had simply vanished from my mind. I'd asked Margaret, and she'd told me, and I'd felt annoyed with myself, but nothing more. It was the kind of thing that happened to people. We're not computers, we don't have perfect recall, we misplace names sometimes. But apparently, I'd mentioned that incident to Michael during a phone call. I'd laughed about it. Getting old, I'd said, making a joke of my own minor inconvenience. And he'd remembered that. He'd probably mentioned it to the others. Dad's forgetting things. He couldn't remember the name of a restaurant. And from that small seed, they'd grown a narrative. They'd started seeing everything I did through the lens of decline. 3 months ago, I'd called Patrick with the wrong information about a family birthday. I'd said it was next month when it was actually the month after. A simple mistake, but apparently that had been added to the growing list of evidence that I was declining. Dad's losing track of time. 2 months ago, I'd asked Jennifer the same question twice in the same conversation. I was distracted, thinking about something else, not really paying attention. I'd realized I'd asked it before she answered me the second time and had laughed about my own absent-mindedness. She hadn't laughed. She'd been quiet. I remember now that quiet had felt strange, but I'd let it go. And then there was the thing with my finances. I'd missed a payment on my credit card, not by much, just a couple of weeks. I'd realized it, I'd paid it immediately, I'd set up automatic payments to make sure it didn't happen again. But apparently my children had taken notice. That incident had probably been the biggest piece of their evidence. Dad's having trouble managing his money. Never mind that I'd managed my money perfectly well for 75 years. Never mind that a single missed payment wasn't evidence of incompetency. The narrative was already there, and my mistake fit perfectly into the shape of it. They'd taken these small human things, moments of normal agging, normal forgetfulness, the kind of lapses that everyone experiences, and they'd woven them together into a story of decline. And once they'd created that story, once they'd shared it with each other and reinforced it and built it up, they'd become convinced of it. They'd believed their own narrative, and then they'd acted on it. The cab pulled up to my house. I paid the driver, gave him a tip. I wasn't confused about how to do that, how much to give, what the appropriate gesture of gratitude was, and got out onto my own property. My house. The house I'd lived in for 32 years. The house I'd taken care of, maintained, paid for. The house that apparently my children believed I wouldn't own much longer. Margaret wasn't home yet. Of course she wasn't. She was still at the restaurant, probably still sitting at that table with the expensive flowers and the crystal chandelier, probably explaining to our children why I'd run off like that, probably already planning how to manage me better next time. I went into my study. I sat at my desk, the desk I'd bought when I was 35, the desk where I'd paid bills and written checks and made decisions about my own life for 40 years. And I called a lawyer. Not Michael, never Michael, but a lawyer I'd used years ago for some property work, someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't have a financial reason to minimize what was happening. I got his answering service. It was late, but I left a detailed message. "This is Robert Hayes. I need to speak to you about a conservatorship petition that's been filed against me without my knowledge or consent. It's urgent. Please call me back as soon as you can." Then I sat there in my study, in the darkness, holding those poisoned documents, and I tried to process the fact that the people I'd loved most in this world had just declared war against me. Part 2, The Unraveling. Margaret came home at 11:30. I heard her car in the driveway, heard the garage door close, heard her moving through the house. I considered coming out, considered trying to talk to her, but I didn't. I stayed in my study and waited to see what she would do. She didn't come looking for me immediately. She went upstairs. I could hear water running, the sound of her getting ready for bed, the way she moved through the house with the knowledge of someone who'd done these things 10,000 times. I wondered if she felt guilty. I wondered if she was lying in bed right now, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she'd done. I gave her an hour, then I went upstairs. She was still awake. The light from her bedside lamp showed her lying on her back, staring at nothing, her hands folded on her stomach. She didn't turn to look at me when I entered the room. I need to understand, I said. I need to hear from you why you did this. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she might not answer me, long enough that I considered whether staying in this marriage was even still an option, or whether that was another thing they'd taken from me tonight. They were worried, she finally said. They all called me. Over the last few months, they all called me individually, and they told me the things they'd noticed. And they asked me if I'd seen them too, if I was worried too. And were you? I asked. Yes, she said, and her voice was so small, so sad, that for a moment I almost believed her, almost sympathized with her. I was worried. I still am. Worried about what exactly? I asked. Tell me specifically what you're worried about. She finally turned to look at me. Her face was streaked with tears. She looked older than she had at dinner, worn down, like the events of the evening had aged her years in hours. You've changed, she said. You're not the same as you were, and I don't know how to help you. I don't know what to do about it. So when Michael suggested this, when he said there were ways to protect you, to help you, I thought maybe he was right. Ways to protect me, I repeated, by taking away my legal rights, by making me a child in my own life. How does that protect me, Margaret? By making sure you're taken care of, she said, by making sure the money is managed properly, by making sure that you don't do something you'll regret. What am I going to do, Margaret? What exactly do you think I'm going to do that I'll regret? She didn't answer. Do you think I'm going to give away all our money? Do you think I'm going to run off with some woman? Do you think I'm going to set the house on fire? What is it? What is the terrible thing you're all so afraid I'm going to do? I don't know, she said, and she was crying harder now. I just know that something is wrong. Something has changed about you. You're not yourself. I'm exactly myself, I said. I'm the same person I've always been. I've just aged. Is that what you're afraid of? That I'm agging? Because news flash, Margaret, so are you. I turned and left the bedroom. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I couldn't stand to be in that room, with that woman I'd shared my life with, knowing that she'd chosen to side with our children against me. I went back down to my study and I called a lawyer again. This time, I didn't wait for the answering service. I looked up contact information for a firm that specialized in elder law, and I called their emergency number. A lawyer named Patricia Steinberg answered. She was professional, calm, and she seemed to understand immediately the severity of what I was describing. You said you haven't signed anything, she asked. Nothing, I confirmed. They gave me the documents tonight, at my birthday dinner, and asked me to sign them. I refused. Good, she said. That's the important thing. They can't do anything without your signature unless they can convince a judge that you're incompetent despite your refusal. That's a much higher bar, but it's not impossible. What does that mean? I asked. What do they have to do? They'd have to file a petition with the court, Patricia explained. They'd have to demonstrate that you lack the capacity to make decisions about your own care. They'd probably request an evaluation by a court-appointed doctor. And then you'd have the right to appear in court, to challenge their petition, to provide your own evidence of your competency. When, I asked, when would all of this happen? It depends on how quickly they move, Patricia said. But if they've already prepared the paperwork, they might file within the next few days or weeks. The court would probably schedule a hearing within 30 to 60 days. I felt something like panic rising in my chest. 30 to 60 days. That was how long I had to prove that my own children were wrong about me. That was how long I had to convince a stranger that I was still capable of managing my own life. What do I need to do? I asked. First, we need to prepare a response to their petition, Patricia said, but let's wait and see if they actually file one. In the meantime, I want you to do a few things. Start keeping detailed records of your daily activities. Document your mental state. Pay your bills on time if you haven't already. get a medical evaluation from your regular doctor, get in writing that you're in good mental health, get a cognitive evaluation from a neuropsychologist. Basically, we're going to build a file that demonstrates your competency. I spent the next hour on the phone with Patricia Steinberg, giving her all the details, answering all her questions, providing her with the names of my children and their contact information. By the time we hung up, it was past 1 in the morning. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I should have been tired, should have been able to sleep, but instead I felt electric. My mind was racing. I kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. I kept imagining a courtroom where I'd have to defend my own sanity, where I'd have to prove that I wasn't the person my children had decided I was. Margaret came downstairs around 2. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee. "Bobby," she said, "please come to bed." "No," I said, "I'm going to stay up. All night. All night if I have to." She came and sat down across from me. She looked like a ghost in the kitchen light, pale and hollow-eyed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry that I sided with them. I'm sorry that I didn't tell you what they were planning. I'm sorry for all of it." I looked at her and I tried to find in her face the woman I'd married. I tried to find the person who'd chosen me, who'd built a life with me, who'd stood next to me through good times and bad. But all I could see was the person who'd betrayed me. "I don't think I can forgive this," I said. "I don't think I can stay in this marriage." "Please," she said, and the desperation in her voice was almost enough to break through my anger. "Almost. Please don't say that. We can fix this. We can work through it." "How?" I demanded. "How do we work through the fact that you were part of a plan to take away my legal rights? How do we work through that?" She didn't have an answer. Over the next few days, my children escalated their attempts. Michael called me, then Jennifer. Patrick left messages. Sarah tried a different approach, texting me lengthy explanations about how much they cared about me, how they were doing this for my own good, how they hoped I could understand that they were just trying to help. I didn't respond to any of them. But I did respond to everything else. I called my bank and spoke to a financial advisor. I set up a notarized list of people authorized to speak on my behalf regarding my financial matters, a list that specifically excluded my children. I went to my doctor and requested a full physical and cognitive evaluation. I scheduled an appointment with a neuropsychologist who came highly recommended. I documented everything, every bill I paid, every rational decision I made, every moment of clarity I experienced. I also did something else. I started writing. I started documenting what had happened that night and why and how. I wrote emails to my children explaining my version of events. I didn't send them, not yet, but I wrote them. And then, exactly 1 week after my birthday, I got a call from Patricia Steinberg. "They filed," she said without preamble. My stomach dropped. "Already, it's been a week." "They were prepared," Patricia confirmed. "They filed a petition for conservatorship this morning. I received notice less than an hour ago. The court has scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks from now. That gives us time to prepare, but not unlimited time. We need to move quickly." 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prepare my defense against my own children. The court-ordered evaluation happened 3 weeks before the hearing. I was evaluated by a doctor appointed by the court, a woman named Dr. Amelia Zhang, who came to my house on a cold Tuesday morning in November. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her 50s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She set up her laptop at my dining room table and spent 4 hours with me, asking questions, showing me puzzles, asking me to remember sequences of numbers, testing my memory with stories, and then asking me to repeat them back. It wasn't difficult, because I'm not incompetent, because my mind still works, because there is nothing wrong with me except that I'm getting older, and apparently in America, that's a crime that should be punished with the loss of all your legal rights. When we were done, Dr. Zhang closed her laptop and looked at me over her glasses. "You scored in the normal to high normal range on all cognitive measures," she said. "Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound. There is nothing in my evaluation that would suggest you lack the capacity to make decisions about your own care or your finances. Will that help? I asked, in court. It should, she said. The judge will consider my evaluation, and if the other side tries to present a contradictory evaluation, we can question their findings based on mine. What if the judge doesn't believe you? I asked. She looked at me for a moment. I can't speak to what a judge will believe, she said, but I can tell you that I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I'm very confident in my assessment. You're fine, Mr. Hayes. You're mentally competent, and nothing I found today suggests otherwise. I wanted to hug her. I almost did. Instead, I thanked her, and she packed up her equipment and she left. And I felt the first small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. But the hope faded when I started reviewing the evidence that Michael's legal team had prepared for the hearing. Patricia had obtained copies of the petition and the supporting documents. What they'd compiled was a masterclass in character assassination. It was also carefully constructed, legally sophisticated, and far more damaging than I would have imagined. They had affidavits from Michael, Jennifer, Patrick, and Sarah. In those affidavits, they described me as confused, forgetful, difficult to reason with, and potentially a danger to myself. They cited specific incidents, some accurate, most exaggerated, some completely false, to build their narrative of decline. Michael claimed that I'd forgotten to pay my mortgage. False. I hadn't forgotten. I'd been 1 day late, and I'd corrected it immediately. Jennifer stated that I'd become argumentative and hostile when she tried to discuss my finances. False. I'd simply asked why she was asking about my finances. Patrick said I'd seemed confused about basic facts when they discussed visiting for the holidays. Sort of true. I'd been confused about which week he was supposed to visit, not a sign of incompetency. Sarah claimed that I'd accused her of stealing from me when she'd borrowed money for a marketing campaign. Not stolen. She had asked to borrow it, and I had agreed, but apparently I'd forgotten that I'd agreed, and then had been upset when she'd taken the money. All of these incidents, when described in the context of legal affidavits, in the language of the court, took on a weight that they didn't deserve. They became evidence of decline rather than what they actually were, the normal fluctuations of life. But what really threw me was that Michael had also included affidavits from their lawyer, describing my refusal to accept help and my hostile response to their concerns. He documented my walking out of the restaurant, framing it as irrational behavior rather than a rational response to being betrayed. And there was a letter from Margaret. I sat down when I read Margaret's letter. I literally had to sit down because my legs couldn't support my weight. She described me in terms that were barely recognizable. She talked about mood swings. She talked about increased irritability. She said that I'd become paranoid, that I'd accused her of conspiring against me, that I'd become isolated and refused family contact. All of that was false. I'd become angry, yes, but not paranoid. Angry is not a sign of incompetency. Angry is a rational response to being betrayed. But reading Margaret's words, I realized that she'd convinced herself of something. She'd built her own narrative to match the one our children had created. She'd started to believe that I was declining, that my anger was a sign of something wrong with my mind rather than something right with my judgment. I called Patricia that same day. Can we use her letter against them? I asked. Can we show that she was part of the conspiracy? Was it a conspiracy? Patricia asked carefully, or was she genuinely expressing concerns? Does it matter? I asked. Either way, she's lied about me. She's made me sound like someone I'm not. I know, Patricia said, and we'll address that in court, but we have to be careful not to make you look like the angry, irrational one. That's what they're expecting. That's what they want, for you to get angry and defensive and prove that there's something wrong with you. So I had to sit with that anger. I had to live with it, contained inside me, knowing that the only way to win was to appear calm, rational, and reasonable, which was its own kind of injustice, wasn't it? They'd betrayed me, lied about me, tried to steal my autonomy, and the only way I could survive it was to not react to that betrayal, to not feel what I felt. The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the longest of my life. I continued to go through the motions of daily life. I went to the gym, I paid my bills, I spent time in my garden, pruning back the roses for winter. Margaret stayed in the house, but we barely spoke. She slept in the guest room. We shared meals in awkward silence. I asked her once if she'd realized what she'd done, if she understood how her letter could affect the hearing, could be used to show that the whole family had colluded against me. I was honest, she said, and there was something defensive in her tone. I wrote what I believed to be true. You wrote what you'd convinced yourself to believe, I said. There's a difference. Maybe, she said, but I'm still worried about you. Even now, even after everything, I'm still worried. Then we have a fundamental disagreement about what worry looks like, I told her, because I don't think worry looks like signing affidavits to take away your spouse's legal rights. I think worry looks like talking to me, actually listening to what I have to say. She didn't respond. A few days before the hearing, I met with Patricia at her office. We went over the testimony I was going to give. We discussed strategy. We talked about how I should present myself, confident but not arrogant, earnest but not desperate, calm regardless of what was said about me. They're going to try to get under your skin, Patricia warned. Michael's lawyer will probably attack the specific incidents. Jennifer's lawyer will probably try to characterize you as hostile. They'll present the letter from Margaret. They might bring in a doctor who will testify that you are showing signs of decline. What do? I asked. You stay calm, Patricia said. You answer questions directly. You acknowledge when something happened but provide context, and you let the evidence speak for itself. Dr. Zhang's evaluation is strong. Your bank records show responsible financial management. Your medical records show good health. All of that will be presented to the judge. What about them? I asked. What about their motivations? What do you mean? Patricia asked. The house, I said. They want the house, or at least Michael does, I think, and maybe they wanted to take control of my finances to pay for something they wanted. I think that's the real reason they're doing this, not because they're worried about me, because they want what I have. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Do you have evidence of that? Not really, I admitted. Just circumstantial stuff. The fact that they chose to do this now, the fact that the house is valuable, the fact that they started documenting my supposed decline right before they filed the petition. But there's no smoking gun, no email where they talk about wanting to sell the house. Then we probably shouldn't present it as a motivation, Patricia said, because without evidence, it's going to sound like you're being paranoid. It's going to sound like exactly the thing they're accusing you of, and the judge might believe them instead of you. That was when I fully understood the bind I was in. I couldn't accuse my children of greed because that would make me sound irrational. I couldn't express my anger because that would make me sound unstable. I couldn't defend myself in the way that seemed most honest because the system didn't allow for that kind of honesty. I had to sit in a courtroom and pretend that my children didn't have ulterior motives. I had to pretend that I believed they were simply worried about me. I had to present myself as grateful for their concern while gently explaining that I was, in fact, fine. I had to perform competency rather than simply be competent. Part 3, the hearing. The courthouse was cold, one of those official buildings that never seems to have the right temperature, always either too warm or too cool, always smelling slightly of floor wax and bureaucracy. My hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Thursday in early December. Patricia had told me to arrive at 8:30. I did. She was already there, sitting in the hallway with her briefcase open, reviewing documents. How are you feeling? She asked when she saw me. Terrified, I admitted, and angry and exhausted, that combination mostly. That's normal, she said, and actually that's good. It means you're taking this seriously. But when we go in that courtroom, you need to dial the anger back to about a 3. We want the judge to understand that you're upset about the situation, but we don't want her to think you're too upset to manage your own life. So I have to perform competency, I said. You have to present your best self, Patricia said, which is what everyone does in court. We're not asking you to lie or fake anything. We are asking you to present the rational, capable version of yourself that exists. We walked into the courtroom at 9:05. It was a smaller courtroom than I'd expected, more intimate. There was a judge's bench at the front, some legal tables to either side, a public gallery with a few chairs. Michael and Jennifer were already there, along with 2 lawyers, one for each of them, I assumed. Catherine was also there, sitting in the gallery. Patrick and Sarah joined us shortly after, along with their own lawyer. It was 3 lawyers against 1. 3 sets of legal resources against my single attorney. The judge entered. Judge Elena Morrison, according to Patricia. She was a woman in her 60s with short, dark hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen it all and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. This is a hearing on the petition for conservatorship filed by Michael Hayes, Jennifer Hayes Mitchell, Patrick Hayes, and Sarah Hayes against Robert Hayes, the judge said. All parties are represented by counsel. Let's begin with opening statements. Petitioners. Michael's lawyer stood. His name was Richard Harrison, and he was a thin man with pale eyes that moved constantly, tracking everything around him. Your Honor, he began, the petitioners in this case are adult children who are deeply concerned about the mental and financial welfare of their father, Robert Hayes, age 75. Over the past several months, they have observed significant changes in his cognitive function, his memory, his judgment, and his overall capacity to manage his personal and financial affairs. These concerns have led them to seek a conservatorship not out of malice, but out of love and concern for their father's well-being. He went on to outline the incidents they documented. He presented them in the context of decline, painting a portrait of a man whose mind was failing. He did it smoothly, professionally, with the certainty of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. When it was Patricia's turn, she stood with a quiet confidence that calmed me somewhat. Your Honor, she said, Robert Hayes is a 75-year-old man of sound mind and body. He has no diagnosis of dementia, no cognitive impairment, no medical condition that would suggest he lacks the capacity to make decisions about his own care. What he does have is age. And in this case, what he also has is a family that has interpreted normal agging, normal forgetfulness, normal occasional confusion as evidence of decline. Mr. Hayes will testify today about his own mental state. And the evidence will show that while Mr. Hayes is getting older, he is not incompetent. Then it was time for testimony. Michael went first. He was confident on the stand, articulate, genuinely concerned-looking. He talked about the restaurant reservation he'd missed. I'd forgotten about one he'd made for Margaret and me early in the year, and I'd double-booked us. He talked about the time I'd called him confused about a grandchild's birthday. He talked about the missed credit card payment. He talked about the time he'd called and I'd asked him to repeat something because I hadn't heard him. Under cross-examination by Patricia, he had to admit that he'd never taken me to see a doctor about these concerns. He couldn't cite any medical evidence that I was experiencing cognitive decline. He admitted that he couldn't remember my asking him the same question twice, only that I'd asked it. So you're testifying to minor lapses in memory, Patricia said, the kind of lapses that people of all ages experience. Yes, Michael said, but combined with the others, it shows a pattern. A pattern of agging, Patricia asked. A pattern of decline, Michael said firmly. Next was Jennifer. She was softer than Michael, more emotional. She talked about how much she loved me, how she didn't want to do this, but how she felt she had no choice. She described me as becoming increasingly paranoid, increasingly hostile to her suggestions about managing my finances. What she meant was that I'd asked her why she was asking about my finances. I'd asked if there was a specific reason she was interested. I'd been defensive because, in hindsight, she'd been fishing. She'd been gathering ammunition. Patricia's cross-examination was gentler with Jennifer than it had been with Michael, but it was no less effective. She got Jennifer to admit that I'd always been protective of my financial information. She got her to acknowledge that asking someone to explain their questions about money wasn't paranoid, it was reasonable. She got her to concede that my response had been defensive, but not irrational. Patrick testified next. He described me as confused and forgetful, citing the incident about the holiday visiting schedule. But under questioning, he admitted that I'd been thinking about a different holiday when he'd called to discuss Thanksgiving. I'd been planning Christmas. It was a simple mismatch, not a sign of cognitive decline. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the stand and was sworn in. Patricia took me through the basics first, my personal history, my health, my daily activities. I talked about going to the gym 3 times a week, about managing my finances, about helping Margaret with the house, about reading, about my garden, about the projects I was working on. Then we moved on to the specific incidents that had been raised. "You forgot a restaurant reservation," Patricia said. "I did," I acknowledged. "My wife Margaret and I were double booked. I'd made a reservation at a different restaurant for the same night. It was an honest mistake." "Do you do that often, make mistakes with your calendar?" "Not often," I said, "but it happens. I'm not great at keeping track of multiple things at once. I'm better now that I use my phone's calendar, but I still make mistakes sometimes. I don't think that's unusual." "Have you ever had anyone in your family suggest to you that they were concerned about your cognitive function?" Patricia asked. "Not once," I said. "Not until Michael presented me with the conservatorship papers on my 75th birthday." "How did that make you feel?" Patricia asked. "Betrayed," I said, and I could see the judge lean forward slightly. "Confused, angry, hurt. I didn't understand why my children thought I was incompetent. I still don't understand it." "Did you get angry?" Patricia asked. "Yes," I said. "I got very angry. I felt like my family had conspired against me without giving me any warning, without giving me any chance to address their concerns." "Did that anger extend to your spouse, Margaret?" I hesitated. This was a dangerous area. If I said yes, if I described how angry I'd been at Margaret, it might make me sound unstable. "Yes," I said anyway. "I was angry at Margaret because she'd apparently been part of their concerns and didn't tell me. I felt betrayed by her too." "Are you still angry?" Patricia asked. "Yes," I said. "I think I have a right to be." Patricia looked at the judge. "I have nothing further." Then it was Richard Harrison's turn to cross-examine me, and this was when things got difficult. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "you mentioned that you didn't understand why your children thought you were incompetent. Have you considered that you might not be the best judge of your own mental state, that you might not recognize signs of decline in yourself?" "I suppose it's possible," I said carefully, "but I've been evaluated by a court-appointed neuropsychologist. Dr. Amelia Zhang tested my memory, my reasoning, my cognitive function, and found no evidence of impairment." "I'm aware of Dr. Zhang's evaluation," Richard said. "I've read it. It's quite favorable. But you're aware that people can appear to have normal cognitive function in a controlled setting and still have problems in daily life." "I suppose," I said, "but I'm not having problems in daily life. I'm managing my finances. I'm maintaining my home. I'm sustaining relationships with family and friends. I'm healthy and active." "Yet you forgot a restaurant reservation," Richard said. "Yes," I said, "a mistake that most people make sometimes." "And you forgot the name of a restaurant your wife mentioned," Richard said. "I forgot the name, but not the restaurant," I said. "I remembered the food, the decor, what I wanted to order. I just couldn't remember the name. That's a very specific kind of memory lapse, and it's very common in people of all ages." Richard continued this pattern of attack for the next hour. He took every small incident and tried to make it sound significant. He asked me the same questions repeatedly, approaching them from different angles, trying to catch me in contradictions or confusion. The truth was, I wasn't confused. I was angry and hurt, but I wasn't confused. And that clarity, I think, was what saved me. When it came time for the judge's decision, she took 2 days to rule. Patricia and I waited in her office for the decision to be posted. I think we did well, Patricia said. The judge seemed skeptical of their evidence, but you can never be sure. The decision came down on a Friday afternoon. Patricia called me as soon as she got word. You won, she said. The judge ruled that there is insufficient evidence to establish that you lack capacity. The conservatorship petition has been denied. I sat down. I literally sat down on my kitchen floor and just sat there for a few minutes, not moving, just breathing. I'd won. After weeks of stress and fear and anger and betrayal, I'd won. That should have been the end of it. Should have been the moment where everything went back to normal, where my life returned to what it had been before my 75th birthday dinner. But it wasn't, because winning in court against your own children doesn't actually repair the damage. It doesn't undo the betrayal. It doesn't fix the relationship. It doesn't restore the trust that was broken. Part 4, after the verdict. Margaret moved out a week after the hearing. We didn't have a dramatic fight or a final confrontation. She simply said that she couldn't stay in the house anymore, that the tension was unbearable, that she needed space. I didn't ask her to stay. I'd told her already that I didn't think I could forgive her, and I'd meant it. So I helped her pack. I drove her to her sister's house in Philadelphia, where she said she'd stay for a while. The house felt enormous after she left, cavernous. I'd lived in it for 32 years, and I'd always thought of it as home, but suddenly it felt like a museum of my own life. Every room reminded me of moments with her. The kitchen, where we'd made countless meals together. The living room, where we'd watched movies and listened to music. The bedroom, where I'd once loved her. I considered selling it. I considered moving into something smaller, something that didn't carry quite so much memory with it. But then, I remembered why they'd tried to take it in the first place. I remembered that they'd wanted this house, and the only thing that was going to stop them from eventually getting it was my stubborn refusal to give it to them. So I stayed. The consequences of my court victory were immediate and severe. Michael sent me a letter from his lawyer stating that he would not be contacting me further, and that if I attempted to contact him, he would pursue harassment charges. Jennifer called me once, tried to apologize, but her apology was so laden with conditions and explanations that it wasn't really an apology at all. It was more of an explanation of why she'd done what she'd done, and that was even worse than no apology. Patrick didn't contact me at all. Sarah texted me. She said she was sorry. She said she'd made a mistake. She said she loved me and hoped that someday I could forgive her. I didn't respond to any of them. What surprised me most, in the months after the hearing, was how little they tried to reach out to me. I would have expected more effort, more attempts at reconciliation, more something, but there was nothing. It was as if, having failed in their conservatorship attempt, they'd simply given up on me. Or perhaps they were waiting for me to come to them, to apologize for being betrayed, to forgive them for their transgression. It took me a long time to understand what had really been happening. It took months of sitting alone in that empty house, processing everything, before I could see the full picture. My children weren't evil. That's what I finally came to understand. They weren't trying to steal from me out of pure greed. They weren't plotting to lock me away in some nursing home while they squandered my estate. What they were doing was something more subtle. They were responding to the universal human fear of agging, specifically their fear of their own agging, because I was getting older and my agging was a mirror that showed them their own future. It was uncomfortable to look at. It was easier to reframe my agging as decline, to medicalize the natural process of getting older, to turn a normal life stage into a pathology that needed to be managed. And in trying to manage my agging, they were trying to manage their own future. They were trying to say, see, we have a plan. We have a way to make sure that this doesn't happen to us the way it's happening to Dad. We have a way to stay in control. But in doing so, they'd robbed me of something crucial. They'd robbed me of the dignity of agging in my own way, on my own terms, with my autonomy intact. And that's a sin that age and failing memory might eventually forgive, but not betrayal of that magnitude. I thought about writing them all lengthy letters explaining what I'd figured out. I thought about calling them back into my life and trying to have real conversations about what they'd done and why. But I didn't. because I realized that understanding their motivation didn't change the facts of what they'd done. It didn't undo the humiliation of being declared unfit while still conscious and capable. It didn't erase the memory of their hands passing papers around my birthday dinner table. Instead, I did something else. I focused on living the kind of life that would prove I'd been right all along. I joined a seniors club at the gym. I started a book discussion group. I volunteered at the local library, helping people navigate the computer systems and find resources. I started writing, not just about what had happened to me, but about other things. Stories I wanted to tell, observations about the world, records of memories I wanted to preserve, not because I was afraid of forgetting them, but because they mattered to me. And I learned something surprising in the process. I was happier than I'd been in years. Margaret came back to the house about 6 months after the hearing. She said she wanted to talk about what was going to happen next: divorce, separation, reconciliation. She said that being at her sister's had given her time to think about everything, and she wanted to try to make things right. I almost said yes, almost agreed to counseling, to trying to rebuild what had been damaged. But then I asked her if she still believed what she'd written in that letter to the court, if she still thought I was paranoid or declining or unable to manage my own life. She didn't answer for a long time, and in that silence, I got my answer. I was honest about how I was feeling, she finally said, about how worried I was. "So you still think I'm incompetent?" I said. "I think you might not recognize decline in yourself," she said. "I think that your defiance in court might actually be a sign that you're not seeing things clearly." And I understood, in that moment, that she would never truly believe me, that in her mind, my court victory had only proven to her that I was good at presenting myself, not that I was actually fine. The narrative she'd created about my decline was stronger than any external evidence to the contrary. So I asked her to leave. I told her I'd be filing for divorce, and I'd expect her to cooperate with the process. I told her she could stay in the house for a month while she found a place, but after that, she'd need to move out. She cried, she begged, she said she'd made a mistake. But mistakes, I'd learned, are things you acknowledge immediately. Mistakes are things you try to correct. What she'd done wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Repeated, deliberate, calculated, and choice is much harder to forgive than mistake. The divorce took a year to finalize. Margaret's lawyer tried to get her a larger settlement, arguing that I'd misunderstood my own mental state and therefore couldn't have made sound financial decisions during the marriage. But the judge in the divorce case, a different judge than the one who'd handled the conservatorship hearing, seemed weary of that argument. She divided our assets according to law and moved on. Margaret moved to Arizona after the divorce was final. She said she needed a fresh start, somewhere new, somewhere that wasn't haunted by the weight of what had happened. I didn't argue. I signed the documents transferring her half of our joint savings. I watched her drive away from the house one last time. And then, finally, I was truly alone. But here's the thing about being alone after being betrayed. There's also a kind of peace in it. There's a freedom in not having to perform emotional compatibility for someone who's decided you're less than you are. There's a strength that comes from standing on your own, proving to yourself, not to anyone else, but to yourself, that you can survive this. Part 5, The Aftermath and Reflection. 3 years after the hearing, I'm still living in the same house. I've made some changes. I've renovated the kitchen. I've painted the bedroom a warm yellow that makes me think of light. I've turned what used to be a den into an office where I write, where I work on projects, where I spend my days creating something rather than just living through them. My relationship with my children remains complicated and distant. Michael has never contacted me. Jennifer sent a Christmas card 2 years after the hearing with a brief handwritten note that said, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can forgive me. Love, Jennifer." I didn't respond to the card. I put it in a drawer where I wouldn't have to look at it every day, but I didn't throw it away either. I'm not ready to throw it away. Patrick reached out 6 months ago. He sent me an email saying he'd been thinking about what happened and that he wanted to apologize. He said that over the years, he'd realized how wrong he'd been. He asked if maybe we could meet for coffee. I considered it. I really did. I thought about what reconciliation would look like. I thought about whether I had the capacity to forgive him. But then I realized something. I wasn't actually interested in reconciliation. I wasn't interested in pretending that what had happened hadn't happened. I wasn't interested in a relationship built on top of that betrayal, no matter how many apologies came with it. So I didn't respond to his email either. Sarah calls me on my birthday. She's called every year since the hearing. We talk for about 15 minutes. We discuss the weather, her business, the house. We maintain a thin connection that isn't really a connection at all. That's just a reminder of what could have been if my children had respected me. And I've made peace with that. I've accepted that these relationships are broken in ways that time and effort might not fix. People change. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to repair, and sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that. What I've learned from all of this is something that nobody really tells you about agging. It's not just a physical process. It's also a process of being redefined by the people around you. It's a period where other people get to decide what your agging means. Are you wise? Are you a burden? Are you still capable? Are you falling apart? And as an agging person, you're in this strange position where you're supposed to accept these definitions even as they're being created, even as they're being used to strip away your autonomy and control. I was lucky, in a sense. I was mentally sharp enough to recognize that the definitions being applied to me were false. I had the resources to hire a lawyer. I had the legal system in my favor. Ultimately, many people in my situation aren't that fortunate. I think about that sometimes. I think about the elderly people who aren't as mentally sharp as I am, or who don't have the resources, or who come from cultures where challenging your adult children is unthinkable. I think about how many of them are quietly having their lives taken over by people who claim to love them, but who are really just managing their agging, controlling their decline, making decisions about when and how their lives should be narrowed. It makes me angry, but it also makes me determined. I started writing my story publicly a year ago. I posted it on Reddit, on an elder law forum, on the AARP website. I wasn't trying to hurt my children or to expose them. I was trying to help other people recognize the warning signs, to understand that if someone you love suddenly decides you're incompetent without warning, that's a cause for concern. Not concern about your mental health, but concern about their motives. The response was overwhelming. People reaching out to tell me that they'd experienced something similar. Adult children trying to have their parents declared incompetent. Spouses conspiring with children against each other. Financial exploitation. Asset seizure. All of it couched in the language of love and protection. And I realized that what happened to me wasn't unique. It was, in fact, disturbingly common. It's something that happens to thousands of elderly people every year in America, and most of them don't fight back, and most of them don't win. I started consulting with a lawyer who specializes in elder law. I started helping other people prepare cases against family members who were trying to exploit them. I started documenting the tactics, the legal strategies, the warning signs. And in doing that, I found a purpose that I hadn't had before. A reason to be a person beyond just existing, beyond just agging, beyond just surviving the betrayal. My 75th birthday, which was supposed to be a celebration of my life, of my resilience, of my survival, instead became the catalyst for everything falling apart. But in falling apart, I discovered something about myself that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. I discovered that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive betrayal, that I could live alone and be happy, that I could create meaning and purpose for myself, independent of the people who'd given birth to me, who'd shared my life with me, who'd vowed to love me. I discovered that being declared unfit and then proving that the declaration was false was one of the most defining moments of my life, because I didn't just prove it to the court. I proved it to myself. I proved that I knew who I was, that I trusted my own judgment, that I would fight for my dignity when it was being taken from me. And that's a lesson that I try to pass on to everyone who reads my story, That's what I write about in my essays and articles now. That's what I tell people when they reach out to me for help. Your life belongs to you, not to your children, not to your spouse, not to any legal authority. It belongs to you, and if someone is trying to take that away from you, they're not doing it out of love. They're doing it out of control, and you have the right to fight for yourself. I don't forgive my children, not because I'm holding a grudge, but because forgiveness implies that there's been genuine acknowledgement and change, and there hasn't been. Michael still works in law, still making decisions that affect people's lives. Jennifer still practices medicine, still wielding authority over vulnerable people. Patrick still works in consulting, still advising companies on strategy and management. And none of them, as far as I can tell, have truly grappled with what they tried to do to me. They haven't examined their own assumptions about agging, their own fear of decline, their own need to control the narrative of my life. So no, I don't forgive them, but I also don't hate them anymore. I feel something more complicated, more gray, a kind of sad recognition that they're people who tried to do something terrible while honestly believing they were doing something good. And that's a tragedy in its own way, not a tragedy for me, but a tragedy for them. The tragedy of people who can convince themselves of anything, who can weaponize love, who can turn concern into control without ever seeing what they're actually doing. I hope someday they figure it out. I hope they have a moment of reckoning where they understand the gravity of what they tried to do. And I hope that experience teaches them something about humility, about the limits of their knowledge, about the danger of believing their own narrative without questioning it. But whether they figure it out or not, I'll be fine. I'm fine. I'm more than fine. I'm living a life that's entirely my own, that I've built piece by piece, room by room, story by story. And that's perhaps the greatest victory of all. Epilogue, 5 years later. They say that time heals all wounds. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. I think what time does, more accurately, is give you distance from the wound. It lets you examine it from a perspective that wasn't available when the wound was fresh and bleeding. 5 years after my birthday dinner, I'm 80 years old. And yes, I do feel the effects of agging. My knees hurt when I climb the stairs. I need reading glasses now. I sleep more than I used to. My hands aren't as steady as they were. These are things that are true. These are things that are real. But I'm also still mentally sharp. I'm still independent. I'm still capable of making decisions about my own life. And crucially, I'm the one who gets to decide when those things stop being true, not my children, not my family, not a judge, me. I've dated a woman named Helen who moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago. She's 76, never married, and she has no interest in trying to control me or manage my life. She's interested in companionship, in shared interests, in building something mutually beneficial. We travel together sometimes. We cook together. We don't live together. We've both learned that independence matters, that maintaining your own space and your own autonomy is important. But we are in a partnership, a real one, built on actual respect rather than the performance of respect. Michael still hasn't contacted me. I received a message from Catherine about 3 years ago, after Michael had heart surgery, asking if I'd like to know how he was doing. I sent back a brief message wishing him well and nothing more. He survived the surgery, went back to his law practice, and as far as I can tell, he's not thought much about what he tried to do to me since. Jennifer and I have reached a kind of détente. We exchange Christmas cards and birthday messages. It's not a real relationship, but it's better than silence. I've decided that I can be civil to her, even if I can't fully forgive her. Patrick and I had coffee once, 2 years after he initially reached out. He apologized again, more thoroughly this time. He talked about his own therapy, his own work on understanding what he'd done and why. I listened. I didn't say I forgave him, but I didn't turn him away either. We've developed a cautious friendship built on the understanding that we both made mistakes. He made a mistake in betraying me, and I made a mistake initially in shutting him out completely. We are working to find some middle ground. Sarah is the one I'm closest to now. She's the only one of my children who seems to have genuinely grappled with what she did. She's written about it in a business ethics article, anonymously, but with enough detail that I recognized it. She talks about how she'd allowed a family narrative to override her own judgment, how she'd been part of something she'd regret for years. She's working to make amends, not just to me, but to other people in her life who she fears she might have wronged in similar ways. And Margaret, I ran into her at a grocery store in Philadelphia about a year ago during a visit to see Jennifer. We were both shocked to see each other. We talked for a few minutes in the produce section among the apples and oranges, and she asked how I was doing. I told her the truth. I was good. I was happy. I was living a full life, and I'd made peace with what happened. She cried a little then, standing in that grocery store, and I did feel something, a flicker of compassion, maybe, or sadness at what we'd had and what we'd lost. But I also knew that there was no going back. That chapter was closed. We'd both have to build new lives from here. The thing that surprised me most about agging, about surviving this experience, is that it's not made me bitter toward the world. I thought it might. I thought that being betrayed by my family would make me suspicious of everyone, cynical about people's motivations, wary of trust. But it hasn't. Instead, it's made me more compassionate. I've learned how easy it is for good people to do bad things when they're afraid, when they're trying to control the uncontrollable, when they're facing their own mortality reflected in someone else's agging. And I've learned that fighting back, that claiming your own dignity, that refusing to accept someone else's narrative about who you are, that's not cruelty. It's love. It's a kind of love that I didn't know how to give to myself before all of this happened. I'm still writing about this. I'm still telling my story. I'm still helping people. And I've come to realize that this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. This is the purpose that emerged from the devastation. So to anyone reading this who's been through something similar or who's afraid that it might happen to them, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not incompetent. You're not declining. You're not a burden to be managed. You're a person worthy of dignity, worthy of respect, worthy of autonomy. Fight for that, fight for yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you. Your family might betray you. Your spouse might choose their fear over their love for you. Your friends might turn away. But you will always have yourself, and that's enough. That was always enough. That will always be enough.